Now of Kakamega County. He's also the chair of the Finance Committee at the Council of Governors. He's our guest this evening on Newsline. And we are talking matters devolution and also talking, of course, matters of public finance because he's a finance expert. Before this, in our earlier conversation, Governor, we talked about the finance bill and what the government is proposing to do in terms of just moving the country forward in the next financial year. And you had some areas of concern that you raised and we were discussing. Now, if you look at all those measures that have been proposed in the finance bill and are going to Parliament, and of course, as Emio has said, if this passes, then we're going to take some action on this. You're a member of Azimio. But sitting back as an expert in finance and looking at the proposals, I asked you earlier, what would you have done differently? And you hadn't finished telling me how you do this differently. So that's the first question. How would you do it differently if you were the man in charge at the national level? And then the second question will be, of course, how will these proposals affect you in then coming up with your own budget at the county level? So let's start with the first one. If you were the president and not the governor of Kakamega, and this was your first budget.
Now, first and foremost, as I told you, the tax proposals should be able to spur economic growth. Now, when you look at the proposals which have largely been put in the finance bill, they are basically are focusing on consumption tax. And that's why I disagree to a large extent when you compare Kenya with other developed countries that we are not taxed properly. Because our GDP is actually lower than those countries. And the difference is because those countries, their tax regime is largely on property tax. So in my view, let's look at increasing the taxes on property tax. Let's go to the so-called the sin tax, you remember?
Yeah.
Tax on those alcohol and stuff, the luxury taxes. And then when you do that, because the increase in consumption tax, what that will do, for example, on fuel, be it on fuel, is going to increase the cost of production. It's going to increase the manufacturing cost. And for me, that again will negate the big objective. And when you look at the impact of that in the counties, of course, we're also having proposals on how we can increase production, let's say in agriculture, because you have so many agricultural activities there since agriculture has devolved largely. And for the country to achieve that proposed economic growth, you need an aggregate of economic growth in 47 counties. The bottom up, remember? Because the focus should be the pyramid of the curve, the bottom of the pyramid. So the impact of this proposed finance bill to the counties, it's actually going to slow down economic growth because you also have activities, production activities in the counties that will suffer. We are now moving into aggregation centers, right? In agriculture, for example, and agribusiness. So if the costs of production increases because you are overtaxing fuel, VAT on fuel, then of course the cost of production will increase. The prices of those commodities will be high and not affordable because on the other hand, you have reduced the disposable income by overtaxing that income again. You get what I mean? So in essence, we will have negative growth, in my view. And that's why we need to have a holistic conversation around these proposals. I'm happy that we'll have that process of public participation, and I'm just hoping that all, like ISPAC, the professional bodies, the Kenyans who are at least educated, will seize the opportunity so that they can have their voice on record. Let the voice be heard. Let those views collected from the public at least be incorporated so that we have some pragmatic amendments in this proposal in the finance bill.
Do you think it's realistic to target to raise 2.8 trillion shillings in revenue?
In my view, as I told you, of course, we can never have a balanced budget per se, because largely the expectations are based on assumptions of economic growth. But you can quickly have activities that can make you achieve the economic growth and therefore making those assumptions largely realistic. One of the proposals is about the stability of the currency, Kenya shilling against the foreign exchange. So you need now to have specific activities that will guarantee the stability of the Kenyan currency and not the finance bill as proposed. Number two, of course, the political environment. When there's a lot of tension, again, investors tend to shy off. They'll hold back the investments. And the proposal for us to develop, of course, I like the fact that the Kenya Kwanza government wants to create more jobs. And you can only create more jobs if you attract investors. So what you need to do is the tax regime in place as proposed must be a tax regime that is encouraging investors. This one, I'm sorry, it's not.
It's not encouraging investors.
That's the bottom line. And that's what we're saying. Let's have a holistic conversation. Let's go back to the basics. Let's look at specific proposals, not largely looking at increasing consumption tax, but property tax, and also expanding the tax base on the untaxed areas, like I talked about Juakali. Let's solve the loopholes in the tax administration. Then we'll raise our revenues. The first 1 year after election is normally challenging. We'll now be moving from economic recession, at least to growth. And then it will peak from there. Before now, we go to another electioneering period.
It will be another issue. Now let's talk about counties. You were elected, you were sworn in, and then you met as Council of Governors, and they elected you to chair the Finance Committee. Among the things that you've had to deal with is, number one, the delayed disbursement of funds to counties, and number two, the negotiation at a national level on the shareable revenue. Now, of course, we saw the conversation at IBEC where even the Deputy President was saying, look, as a chair of IBEC, I can tell you we don't have any more money. Even if you whipped us, you removed our trousers and whipped us, we would not get a shilling more than 385. That 385 went through the National Assembly, it passed. It went through the Senate, it passed. It is actually now looking like 385 is what you're going to receive. You wanted 427.
425.
425. CRA had recommended 407. Nowhere close to that. All right, so now what? Are you resigned to fate?
Of course, as at now, it's very unfortunate that we had a lot of hopes by the way in Senate, because Senate, their primary responsibility is to protect and support devolution. What we expected is our proposal of 425 billion. If we deemed not tenable, then we expected Senate having recommended 47 billion as proposed by the Commission of Revenue Allocation. And by the way, under Article 216, it is CRA that is mandated to make recommendations on equitable shareable revenue between the national government and the counties. 216. And that commission has specific responsibilities. For them to come up with those recommendations, they do a lot of research, public participation, etc. So we were very disappointed, really, as governors, that senators decided to abdicate their responsibility.
But before we get to the senators, governors had abdicated their responsibility.
How now?
Because you met at IBEC and you were unable to actually get at least the 407 by the Commission on Revenue Allocation?
You know,
when you sit at IBEC,
yeah.
are you sitting as equal partners with the national government, or are you sitting as junior partners with the national government?
I think at IBEC, one thing that I want to just bring to your attention, the conversation on equitable share at IBEC were just proposals. I remember very well, governors were really justified why we need 425. CRA was also a party. They gave proposal of 47, putting all those statistical justifications and the case studies. And National Treasury on its part, which now represents the national government, a point which you disagree to some extent. National Treasury should be independent. It should be the Minister of Finance talking about the proposal for national government. But in this particular case, the position of National Treasury is now the position of national government. So on that alone, we are starting as a disadvantaged group. Because instead of National Treasury looking at intergovernmental functions as exposed in Article 187, they need to look at these bodies being independent, so that they look at the Constitution, National Treasury proper, and then you make proposals with support from that commission that is paid salaries to make recommendation on what is appropriate for counties. So where we start losing it is where the national government is having already an edge over the counties, because National Treasury is supporting national government.
It's already sitting there.
Yeah.
As IBEC, does IBEC actually discuss and come up with resolutions? Or does IBEC just sit, discuss, people propose, and it's just a talking shop? Because previously, the reason I'm asking this is previously, when the national government, when the National Treasury presented a division of revenue bill, before a sufficient conversation had happened at IBEC, the courts slapped that and said, no, this must first be discussed and agreed upon as a conversation on revenue share. So now, as you sit as IBEC, do you sit?
I want to take you back. The second Senate was on point. Those honorable members were speaking with one voice, irrespective of the political affiliation. And that is why they made progress. The current Senate, I'm afraid, they are voting on party lines, unfortunately. And that's why last year, Senate stamped its authority and said, look, we are not agreeing on the proposal to reduce money going to counties. They registered this agreement, and that's why at least governors got some money. But now this current one is the reverse. And that's why we are telling them, senators, wake up. Remember, your key responsibility is to support devolution and counties thereof. What we expected, my brother, is at least the recommendation which had been proposed on the floor of Senate by the Finance Committee, at least be considered. Worst case scenario, the register disagreements so that we go to arbitration.
You're moving away from where I'm taking you. I'm taking you to IBEC. You're taking me to the Senate. Let me bring you back to IBEC. What is the purpose of IBEC?
IBEC, you remember I told you IBEC, of course, is Intergovernmental Budget Economic Forum chaired by the Deputy President, right?
Yes.
Of course, one of the agenda items there is to discuss about budgets for counties, national government, etc., disbursement issues, and that kind of thing.
Yes.
The meeting we had when we were discussing a division of revenue allocation, we made proposals, right? Those proposals at IBEC were proposals from COG, CRA, at National Treasury.
Yeah.
Now, the first conversation of course, this bill was presented to the National Assembly. And National Assembly, of course, Kenya Kwanza having the majority, they approved it. Are we together?
Yes.
Now, as governors, our hope was with the Senate. Because at IBEC, there were just proposals. And looking at the provisions in the Constitution, this division of revenue allocation, the ultimate institution that now is supposed to discuss and approve it is Senate after it has moved from the National Assembly. So Senate failed us.
So Senate is the point.
It failed us.
Senate is where it stops.
Yeah.
When we asked the president this question on Sunday on, why 385, so he said, look, 385 is because, number one, we're looking at the last audited and approved accounts and looking at the percentage. And number two, we're also looking at how much revenue we are raising and what the needs are.
Okay.
Because this money cannot come from elsewhere. It can only come from our revenues. He said that. And then number three, he said, in addition to the 385, there's the other money that is coming from other quarters, including the national government, coming to the counties to support in county operations. For example, the national government has a big agenda of putting up the industrial parks in all the 47 counties. 4.7 billion shillings will come into counties. And you will do the procurement. You will tell us about your issues on procurement. Then there's money that is coming as conditional grants, 44 billion shillings, coming to counties. The donor-funded projects will come to counties. The judiciary, because it wants to build more courts, part of the judiciary fund will come to counties. So in the end, 429 billion shillings will come to counties.
Eric, let me tell you, we appreciate the fact that our national government is actually supporting counties on some aspects, for example, aggregation centers. And by the way, when the monies that is budgeted through national government to come as conditional grants, what the counties do is to be the last mile. For example, the fertilizer, which is procured at the national level,
yes,
but meant to go to mashinani. So it comes in as a conditional grant. So we are not involved in the procurement. So what I'm trying to say.
So what's the role of the county government there?
Last mile, just distribution.
Just distribution.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we are saying, the conditional grants, of course, especially those that have been negotiated by the respective development partners is okay. But the monies we are talking about is equitable share from the collections. Now, when we're just unpacking the budget policy statements, 2023, there are some specific budget lines which had an increment of almost 40 billion. For example, agriculture, health that is 95% devolved, water environment, stormwater management is actually a devolved function. So all those budget lines in the proposal, without going outside the budget policy statement 2023, we had an increase in allocations. So what we are saying, look, just look at the increase in those specific allocations and then give to the counties. In Kakamega, for example, I've bought fertilizer and maize seeds worth 700 million. It's not even enough. There were 240,000 bags of fertilizer. Not even enough for planting and top dressing. We can do it. Now, some of the conditional grants which have been proposed in the budget are not equitable. For example, you have around 15 billion that is going to construct dams.
Yes.
You can't do a dam in Wajir. You cannot do a dam in Mandera, so it won't be equitable per se. That's what we are saying. Let's have the equitable share as proposed, but of course now is the water under the bridge, but going forward, we will rather an increment to come in through equitable share as opposed to conditional grants, because conditional grants are specific to programs.
And they're not going to help everybody.
No.
There are many counties that will not receive this.
Absolutely.
The question tonight, Governor, is whether the devolution promise is alive. Right? So 13 years now since, 10 years now since devolution was rolled out, and there are very many issues that still remain at national level. Unbundling of functions that are supposed to be devolved. You say, what is fully devolved? Is agriculture fully devolved? Is health fully devolved? Are those functions that are supposed to be county government functions actually county government functions today? Are they properly supported with finances? What's the state of that, of the unbundling of functions?
Now, that's a good question. When you look at the Constitution and the framers of the Constitution, the transitional clause had given 5 years, right?
Yes.
Ideally, by 2015, all those functions that had been itemized to go to counties were supposed to have moved. Issues of fully devolving even roads. But instead, we have specific bodies like KERA, KURA now were created in 2015. So instead of devolving the roads functions to counties, you bring on board KURA and KERA. Issues around water, agriculture. So we still have unfinished business. And that's why the president has promised that in the next financial year, he has tasked IGRTC, the Intergovernmental Technical Committee, Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee, to do what we call transfer. First of all, of course, the items have already been identified, the functions.
Yeah.
They were now doing the costing. And then, of course, after the costing has been done, the budget implication will be clear. And with political goodwill, then the transfer will be done in the next financial year. I know IGRTC has been having sessions with some officers from counties to look at the costing of those functions that are devolved. Once that is done, we hope that in the next financial year, it will be transferred. What we want is a fiscal discipline, where funds, of course, follow activities. We don't want, me, I'll not be very comfortable in Kakamega, and that's the position of all the governors anyway, of functions being devolved and without funds following those functions.
You actually had mentioned an issue here raising concern of the budgetary allocation to the health ministry, and yet health is a devolved function.
Yeah.
How much is the health ministry proposed to receive in the next financial year?
I think, if my memory serves me well, it was around 70 billion.
70 billion shillings?
70 billion shillings, that's health ministry.
At health?
Yeah, up from...
What function does the national government have with health?
Of course, when you look at the national function, that we still have some construction of level 4 hospitals, which national government is doing. In my view, that function should be devolved as per the Constitution, as Schedule 4. We have vaccinations, which the national government is doing. It's a good one to ensure equity. The primary doctors, we call them community health volunteers. Nowadays they're called community health promoters. And that's level 1 doctors. Those are devolved functions. In my view, national government has no business dealing with the primary doctors, right? So any monies that goes to those CHPs should be devolved as well and disbursed to the counties. Level 2, level 3 is clinics, health centers. Those are devolved functions. Infrastructure for maybe disease control, that can be a national function, for example, addressing COVID and any national pandemic. So ideally, we can just have a few policy activities
and some interventions.
National interventions but most of the 90 plus should be devolved, which have been devolved, but the challenge is the funds are not following.
The funds are not following this.
Absolutely.
What can you do to get this done? Or what are you planning to do, actually?
As I said, we had a meeting with the President, William Ruto, as governors early in the year in Naivasha. I think it was in February.
Yeah.
He gave a commitment that is tasked to the IGRTC to fast track the process of making sure that those functions are identified, gazetted, costed, and transferred.
Yeah.
So the last 2 weeks that process has been going on, and because we are hopeful that it will be done, because we don't just want the functions to be transferred, we also want the funds to follow. So it's a process that we're giving the national government, at least maybe in the supplementary budget or next financial year, to do the transfer, the costing, so that at least we have functions and funds thereof.
But Governor, is this an exclusive responsibility of the national government?
Of course, when you look
Does
at
the IGRTC report to only the national government?
Ideally, IGRTC, when you look at International Government Relations Act, number 2 of 2012, IGRA Act is actually supposed to be discussing intergovernmental issues. And because the Constitution, again, is very clear under Article 187 on the functions of government, both levels of government. So IGRTC is now the body that's supposed to spearhead that transition. Of course, their budget is derived from the national government. That's why I was attaching to national government, because it's actually doing activities as directed by the executive. Yeah.
So it answers to the executive?
Yes.
So that means if, for example, the national government starves it of some cash or frustrates its work, then all those things that we're talking about, unbundling and costing of functions will be delayed.
Absolutely.
Is that the case? Is that what we should have?
No.
Should this body not be a body that sits, in between these two governments?
In fact,
it's an intergovernmental relations technical committee. Intergovernmental means you sit in between the governments.
In fact, the reason why it's a committee, we are looking at transitional issues being transitional, as it were, not being there in the foreseeable future. So once their mandate is done, then its lives end, right?
Yeah.
We don't want it to become a prastato. That was the spirit of the Constitution. So it's just technical reporting to national government, because that's where they get their allocation anyway. And after the unbundling is done and fully implemented, then it should cease.
Then it ceases to operate.
Yeah.
This basically is the one that took over from the Transition Authority, which should have, in many people's opinion, lasted a bit longer to ensure that it completes the job that was given by the framers of the Constitution.
Absolutely.
Let's come into the issue now that you raised earlier of what you said in the last Council of Governors full council meeting. You looked and you raised the issue of the National Treasury. And you say that the National Treasury, as it is constituted now, is an appendage of the national government. And it shouldn't be. Now explain this to everybody who's hearing. What do you mean it should not be?
Of course, the best recommendation is to have an independent national treasury, which will look at the interests of both levels of government. And that's why we are very pragmatic to propose that let's have the Ministry of Finance reporting to national government and the National Treasury being independent, so that when they do proposals of revenue share, they look at what the Constitution say, what are the functions that have been devolved, what are the functions that are in the National Treasury. And then when now the recommendation on the revenue share is done, of course, taking care of Article 203 expenditure items, like loan repayments, etc., interest. Then we have the equitable share. And then, of course, we look at the Constitution on what is supposed to be taken to counties. Then a National Treasury that uses straight line budget approach as opposed to activity-based. And just say, let's increase by 10% of what they got last year. Or let's increase by X, because last year we were getting 370. So like, okay, let's give these guys 15%.
15 billion.
So 15 billion more. It should be scientific, guided by activities as proposed by CRA. And then now the National Treasury, if it's independent enough, then counties will...
For it to be independent, who needs to sit in the National Treasury?
Pardon?
If we were to go by your proposal as a Council of Governors, say we had an independent National Treasury, which is delinked from the Ministry of Finance. So who sits in the National Treasury?
Of course, what will happen is it will be a body which the PFM Act can now designate the officers. You can maybe have a commissioner or a DG, right? That it will be independent. So the Constitution, under, of course, Chapter 12 on public finance, and now through the PFM Act, can prescribe the composition of that commission called the National Treasury. Yeah.
What role would the control of budget play?
Now, control of budget, her role comes in after the budget has already been done to approve expenditure from the consolidated fund. All the requests to counties and expenditure by the national government. And this is now the budget. But you see, the National Treasury we are talking about will be starting from the formulation of the budget policy statement, because it cuts across. By the way, the control of budget, in our view, again, she's overstepping her mandate, trying to start auditing requests. And yet your work is to approve as proposed in the budget. And of course, checking that those functions are actually devolved. This is done at the grassroots because we have a coordinator of COB in every county. But unfortunately, after the coordinator reviews those requests, they come to Nairobi. We have come of age, my brother.
So you want the COB devolved?
It's devolved, but now the ultimate approval is done at
the headquarters.
At the headquarters. Physically, not even automated. I think there is a story for another day, but of course we have issues as governors with regard to the manual approval of requests from the counties.
Governor, let's now talk about Kakamega. And you are now running the county government of Kakamega. How many months now since you were sworn in?
September last year.
Right? So in those months as you took over, when you were campaigning and when you got into office, of course when you were campaigning you were making promises left, right and center and saying this is what we'd like to do. And then you get into office. Is the situation the same as what you had expected it to be?
Of course, when you're campaigning and making promises, the assumption is things will be as expected, especially on the monies available from the equitable share. You expect that when you get in, the equitable share, which is largely what finances county budgets, as opposed to on-source revenue, will be available as and when is required. But the reality on the ground is we have arrears. As at right now, we have arrears dating all the way from March, almost 94 points, 4 billion shillings. March, we still have arrears of around 29.6 billion. April, we still have arrears of around 33.3 billion.
How has this impacted you in your work as governor?
Of course, it slowed down some of the programs, especially the recurrent programs, where you have to slow down activities. Contractors who are on the ground, they need to be paid. They demobilize because they cannot be there without money.
Yeah.
For recurrent expenditure, of course, some of us are pragmatic. You go and do some short-term borrowing from commercial banks. Of course, you see some counties even having strikes because of those challenges. So ideally, it disrupts your thought process in terms of what you had programmed to do for the people. And that's why, for me, things are different. Because you are now confronted with the new challenges of delayed disbursements of funds. And then the expectations from Wananchi are out of this world.
What is the biggest pain point for the people of Kakamega?
Of course, when you look at the biggest is salaries. Right now we're doing almost 38%, which of course slightly above the 35%, but we're doing very well compared to other counties. So my responsibility is to make sure that we comply as much as possible. And then, of course, we designate 30% of that disbursement to development projects, because that is what will inspire economic growth, infrastructure, water, healthcare, of course, roads. At least we've tried to do that. Pending bills, you know. Like Kakamega, I'm happy that we are almost clearing the pending bills that are inherited around 1.3 billion. So it's a matter of balance.
What's the current balance?
It's only 134 billion, which I expect to clear by the disbursement for February, which we received last week in CRF, County Revenue Fund, but it's yet now to go to the facilities account. Again, because of the COB approval process. That is manual.
Things that have to be done,
you know,
and have to be done manually.
Yeah.
The people of Kakamega today, when you listen to them, because of course you have to have your ear on the ground, what are they demanding today? What is the most critical service that they say, our governor needs to be doing this?
Now, what I've seen in Kakamega, we've done well in terms of food security, where we distributed fertilizer over for 700 million. Healthcare, I bought drugs, almost 130 million. But again, the replenishment is not regular because of the delayed disbursements. So they need drugs in hospitals. When I came in, of course, I had to reorganize the budget. My priority was now on dealing with the soft issues as opposed to brick and mortar. Because there's no point of having dispensaries and healthcare facilities.
We don't have the medicine.
There's no medicine. So I reorganized the budget on in medical and prioritized to buy medicine. But now the medicine are exhausted. You can't have stocks throughout. So the challenge again is, yes, Governor, alitupatia dawa. When are we getting the next inventory? Again, it's tied to the delayed disbursements. Education, I gave out 120 million for bursary. Again, it's not enough. People want more because the poverty levels are very high, and they become worse with this finance bill. Now, so those are the issues we're looking at. They want clean water, piped water in the houses. My promise was clear that when we get in, we'll have a program of ensuring that the infrastructure that we have facilitates the piping water. Again, all those things. Of course, we are now looking at the next financial year, because largely when you come in is to reorganize the budget to supplementary, because it's not your budget, refocus and stuff like that. But you know, when Wananchi don't understand that now this is not your budget. For them, they want when you come in,
that's what you promised.
As promised. They want deployment, People think that when you come in, you sack everybody who is there and bring another lot. So those are the challenges that of course, we are trying to manage. But one more important thing is, for me, I'm always available. I go to the office regularly. Of course, the work starts at home, so I'm always available with him and explain the issues. And that's why Kakamega, we don't have a big challenge, because at least I have many forums that I talk to these people to be patient that the development will come when funds are also released on time. Yeah.
It sounds like the issue of delayed disbursement of funds is a threat to the entire concept and aspirations of devolution. Because everything you've talked about, you said, but then again, the funds have not come on time, so I have had to reorganize. I have to think of how I can put medicine in hospitals. I have to think of how I can support children who are going to school. I have to think of how I can provide water to the people. But yet people, as far as the ordinary citizen of Kakamega is concerned, they are contributing to taxes. And they elected you as governor. And it's your job to go there and make sure that the promises that you made, matching the needs that they have, are delivered. So what is it that you want to do? What do you plan to do so that you don't go back to the people and say, unajua pesa itoki Nairobi? Because I'm sure the people of Kakamega don't really care. Pesa itoke Nairobi, itoke Binguni. They elected you.
Eric, the reason why media comes in, remember, you guys have three main responsibilities: informing, entertaining, and of course educating.
Yes.
Through these forums, siku wa Kenya wamechanuka, my friend. They follow these things. When you tell them money has not come, they will understand. They know, yes, our government has very good intentions, but money has not come. The larger population. So the issue is about constant communication. Now, when you go back to our other strategy of mitigating against the delays, and of course having an alternative, is to enhance on-source revenue. Of course, the taxable areas and areas you need to levy, a few of those levies, also very few, like in markets, property, and of course a few levies on roads, etc. But largely, what I'm doing in Kakamega, for example, is to automate. So at least to reduce the wastage through automation, we are looking at collecting at least 2 billion Kenya shillings. Of course,
in a financial year.
In a financial year.
That's your target.
That's my target.
What's your current
1.2.
1.2.
That was what was collected. And of course, when I do now the full financial year, we're actually looking at surpassing. In the next 5 years, I have to hit a target of 5.5 billion, because there are many opportunities that we can exploit as provided for in the Constitution on what is actually supposed to be taxed at the counties. And more importantly, automating that framework. So at least kule chini, we are trying what we can do. And of course, on healthcare, there is now the approval to have what we call Facilities Improvement Fund, where all the collections from the health facilities is actually taken back. Yeah.
So it's ring-fenced per facility?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it goes then
because in Kakamega, for example, healthcare is my biggest spender of my budget. Almost 30% goes to healthcare, because they have the most number of workers, also facilities, etc., medicines, is healthcare. Yeah.
Governor, we thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
We've had an interesting conversation at national level and, of course, at county level. You are not only the governor of Kakamega County, but you're also a national leader. That's why it's important for us to have that conversation. Asante sana. Ukirudi Kakamega, wasalimie.
I will, of course. Na karibu sana, so that you can tour our only existing rainforest, the Kakamega forest.
It's the only existing rainforest?
Tropical rainforest.
Yeah. We will come and visit it.
Very well.
Asante.
Nashukuru sana.
Now, Taita Governor Andrew Mwadime